Hello, everyone, and welcome to this broadcast. Mark DeJesus in the house, bringing a live broadcast to you in your home or wherever you are today. It's a privilege and an honor to be with you. My heart is to bring insights for your healing and freedom journey. I'm all about mental, emotional, and relationship health. And if you are too, you've come to a great place. Do me a favor, hit that like button and hit subscribe. And you can also go over to markdejesus.com where you'll find a fantastic treasure trove of many blog posts, books, videos, podcast material, all available to help you walk in greater healing and freedom in your life. I've also created an online healing and freedom community that you can join today if you like, for those that want to take a next level step in their journey, in their process. I'm currently teaching on my book, The OCD Healing Journey, which is now being produced in a video content. I am taking an expansive look into this battleground that many people are struggling with, and every week I'm posting new material for that. But it is fantastic to be able to be here with you today. I'm going to get into the subject of the Christian and psychology. Going to take a bit of a deep dive, a bit of a journey, and going to cover a lot of ground today. So get ready. We're going to get into this pretty quick here, but I must bring the beloved woman of my life, the bride who brings wonderful splendor and glory every time she speaks. Ladies and gentlemen, the woman I cannot live without, Mrs. Melissa DeJesus.
Hello.
Is in the house today.
I am here. Yes. I have lemon balm tea today, everybody.
Yes, and I have my Pellegrino. But here's the thing. This drink is cold, and it is very cold outside. Yeah. So I really should have something warmer here. But
yeah, we should. We started a conversation in the chat because we are now officially that age where we just want to talk about the weather all the time.
Yes. We're getting old.
We started in the live chat and everyone's sharing, so it's basically cold everywhere. Okay.
Yeah.
I think unless you're in maybe the Caribbean, and I think even the Caribbean is having a cold spell.
Yeah.
It's just cold right now.
Do me a favor, in the comment section, post where you are and what the temperature is. Mm-hmm. If you watch this later on down the road, something like that. But that's not for you. But for the people in the feed right now, where you are, because right now I think the record low so far.
I think it's Dave Jenkins.
It's Chicago.
Yeah,
and but I know we got some Canadians here. I know we've got some Wisconsin. I know we've got some Dakotas. Some of that going on too. So, but Chicago,
Minnesota 22.
Chicago. Dave said with the wind chill he was negative 40.
No, sir.
That's
no. I would be literally out. Okay, what did we get down to? Like 19 here, which is so abnormal.
This weekend, yeah.
Yeah, I can't. I'm not good about it. I had the heating blanket plugged in, and the dog saw the heating blanket being plugged in and was like sitting there waiting for me. And then as soon as I sat down with the blanket, got right up.
Now he's into it.
Even the dog knows it's cold, okay?
Yes.
So he knew the heating blanket's coming out, yeah. I don't like it. I just don't like it. No, it's too much for me.
Yeah, and then I think about Florida, but then I look at Florida.
Florida's cold too.
They're 42, so it's...
Yeah. You know what, though? Listen, 40's better than 19.
New Mexico's 51. That's all right. Now we're talking, Paige. Wait a second. Miami, 67.
Wait, where'd you see that? Las Vegas is 56. Okay, I would take that right now.
Oof.
Mm-hmm. I'll take it.
Give me some Miami. Mm-hmm. Greenville, yeah. Oh, Shosha, there he is. Oh, you know what? Let me let you.
How dare you just throw it in there? We have to
has to be official.
Thing.
Has to be official. Okay, why don't you greet everyone in the live feed?
Well, you know what? Let's welcome our little Estelle, because she is the best and we love her. And she was the first in the chat today. So Estelle, we love you.
And I love because she lives over across the pond.
Any way that you can do an accent.
Yes. She said, I am not going to bed to watch this. So that's an honor. Great to have you.
Thank you, Estelle. We have Andy, Ayo, Matthew, Taste His Goodness, Pedro Leon, thank you so much. Dave Jenkins, as always. We love Dave. Shannon Kirby. Where's Shannon from? Grew up in Chicago. Let's see what she says. I'm going to try to call out. Tennessee is 28. Tennessee is cold.
Yes.
I think that's cold for you guys. Like, you don't normally have that, I'm thinking. Sabrina, hello. Polly, Adrian, Lydia S. Adrian! Lydia's from Raleigh. Raleigh's like 3 hours. We're outside of Charlotte. I think that's like 3 hours from us.
Yeah.
We don't really venture up that way. We need 2 more. Deborah, Danielle. Oh! I am Kaya, Rashawn. Let's see. Yeah, Polly said much better than New England. Yeah, let me tell you, we have family still up in New England, and I'm always checking. Like, I look at our town, and then I slide the little thing over and check what's going on in Connecticut. I will tell you what, though, it's not been a big difference lately, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all.
Yeah, but I'm still with Polly.
Okay, ready? John
Piccinati! To the 7% Italian.
Those of you that are new, we like to say people's names, and certain people we just like to add flavor to their names.
That's right.
Okay, Christ is Lord. Georgia is 15. Yeah, it's not good.
Oof.
Paul Shosha.
Mm-hmm. Uncle Paulie.
Lynn and Janata. Hello. Uncle Paulie. HS. Let me go down. Chibithi. I don't know. Am I saying it right? Walker Link, Minnesota. Let's see. Miss M, JC Burdenlifter, Rock Hill in the house. Hello.
That's awesome.
David Rodriguez, T, Rich Faith, Jessica Scott, Stash Blade. I think I said Lydia already. Ashley, Song Babe, DC. Oh, DC. Ashley's in DC. DC's cold. I feel like DC's always cold, isn't it?
I'm laughing because Song Babe wrote, this is my first live stream. This is boisterous.
We are boisterous. Listen, I just want to, though I had to let Katie know in Rumble. Oh, Katie in Rumble. Katie holding it down. I was already chatting with her. Katie's in Wisconsin.
We're
It
both
is 20 degrees, Miss Katie. No, I don't like it.
We're both used to loud talking because my dad's Puerto Rican.
Loud talking?
No, she said boisterous.
Oh.
So yeah, isn't that is that what that means?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're doing a lot of yelling and stuff like
do.
that. But when you're around our dinner table, yeah, you get used to, because my dad's Puerto Rican and my mom, like me, has hearing issues. So there's a lot of like.
Yeah. We have to yell a lot. Anyway, we should break the news to everybody about the soundboard. So for those of you that were maybe in whatever chat, whatever live stream you did last week, because you've done quite a few.
Yeah.
And we did a poll. Was it last week? I can't even remember now.
Don't put a definite on this. We might figure something out.
Okay, we might. But someone was asking, what does the church lady think? So I'm just going to say we can't hear from the church ladies on vacation until we figure.
There you go. We don't have to RIP it yet, but
we're not going to go.
Yeah. But
doom and gloom.
Yeah. But I'm no longer right now.
Yes.
I'm no longer using road equipment. RODE is the name of the company, and if you're
technology, maybe we should tag them and say, get it together.
I've written to them so many times, but I've gone through, let's see, 3 mixers of theirs, 2 microphones. So
it's not boding well for them.
Can't say. I may have to go with another company, which means I may not have that effect. So we'll see. She may be on probation for indefinitely. So
I'm not good about it. Anyway, Dave Jenkins said you could just do one of your impressions, which you are good at.
True.
You could start doing
this is
that
true.
now.
It's true. Or I need to develop a company that just makes those sounds. And you can use it anywhere for anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be great?
That would be awesome.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get into the subject of the Christian and psychology. I think I'm just going to go ahead and get right into this because it's going to take some time for me to walk through this material. I know some people are excited about this. I get a lot of opinions asking me about this subject of psychological approaches and things like that. The goal today is going to be to dive into this issue, to dive into this subject, take a bit of a journey. And hopefully what you get out of today will be helpful for your life and what you're going through. And my goal is to give some grounded perspectives because we can often get into ditches when it comes to subjects like this. And I want to go back, give a little bit of history, give some perspective, share a little bit of my story, and then walk through some perspectives that I think would be helpful for your life and those you interact with. Now, Couple things I need to let you know about as I dive into this. Whenever you talk of mental health issues, and you got to understand, your brother from another mother is talking about mental health all the time in all my broadcasts. But YouTube, what they do in their algorithm is they favor people that are labeled professionally licensed therapists or professionally licensed counselor. They put a label on it. You'll see it right underneath. And so in topics, when you search certain topics, they get favored in that area. I'm not saying that to say, the world's against me, but it's just a reality and understanding, because I feel very strongly called to speak to these areas, and has brought a lot of help and benefit to people's lives. It's an honor to do that. So with that said, do me a favor. If today's broadcast blesses you, share it with people that you know. Say, hey, this really helped me. This helped put some perspective to some areas. I've done a lot of work, and what I'm going to share today, it comes out of many, many, many years, blood, sweat, and tears of navigating this whole mental health psychology kind of arena. And we'll see where I go. Who knows? I could go into some things that may trigger the algorithm and make it go like, wait, what'd you say? As far as those who are participating in the broadcast, please do us a favor and refrain from debating or arguing in the comment section. That's not a place to do that. We're not saying that you have, but this issue I'm going to get in today creates a lot of different perspectives. People can jump in and just want to start throwing their comments and throwing their convictions. It's a heavily charged subject. So just, argumentative kind of comments, they're going to be removed. So I'm seeking to help land us in some reasonable perspectives. You don't have to agree with where I'm going. You don't have to agree with my conclusions, but I think you can get something out of this no matter where you are in your journey, because my goal is to help bring some landing to many people out there that are deeply hurting, deeply struggling, and on top of it, they're confused about where they go for help. And we have unnecessary strife in the body of Christ that doesn't help what we're already fighting and battling in. So with that said, you have any other things before I get into this, or you?
No, I think that's
go?
good.
Okay.
I just wanted you to say that. So thank you.
That's helpful for you in the comment section. So when we talk about the Christian and psychology, there are two perspectives up front that often you'll find in the church that can be two avenues that people believe in. The first one's pretty intense. The second one, I want to break that down just a little bit. The two main perspectives you'll often hear coming out of the church online or even inside a church setting kind of go like this. Number one is psychology is 100% of the devil. Evil, a false religion, should be rejected in every single way, form, and fashion. You've heard people talk like this. You've heard people talk from this kind of standpoint. It can even get as intense as, if you're getting counseling, then that means you're not applying God's word. Maybe you're deceived. Maybe you're not really saved. You haven't given your heart fully over to God. You haven't given things over to Jesus. You haven't surrendered. You're just not a whole list of things. Or maybe you've got a bunch of devils. You just haven't gotten delivered yet. And you can hear very quickly when a pastor talks about psychology, you can hear very quickly those who are in this kind of camp, they don't hold back. They let you know right up front all the time. And they find different ways of sharing their disdain for this. And I tried to bring some balance. A few months ago, I addressed a video by a preacher that somebody submitted to me, and I gave some feedback regarding, he went down the line of inner healing, like that kind of perspective, and tried to give some balanced responses to the things that he shared. So that's one perspective, a very intense perspective. Another one, very, very common, is that psychology is something to appreciate, can appreciate the value it brings as an outsource for problems that arise in a Christian's life. Now, what do I mean by outsource? The church's response being, we're here, we're growing the church, we're winning souls, we are serving, doing these things. Oh, you've got that issue. Well, go ahead and get some help, out there at a therapist or a psychologist. And it's seen as something that's outside of what church life cultivates. Today's modern pastor has so much on their plate. If they do have a value for this, they'll often hire someone on staff that is a pastoral care at a basic level, or they may go even further and have pastoral counseling on staff available depending on the resources that are available. I remember many times when I'd bump into pastors and they'd find out what I do, they kind of peg me as a counselor, and they'd go, so you do counseling? Oh, That's exhausting. So I'm going to get into that a little bit and get into some things that I think could help our perspective. But when we talk about psychology, what are we talking about when we talk about that word? It's the study of the soul. Now, I feel with believers just starting here, we already are dipping our feet into confusion because many Christians get confused about what the soul even is. When we're talking about the soul, I'm just going to talk about it from a basic level. I don't want things to get too complicated. We're talking about the mind's workings, the emotional workings, mindsets and perspectives that you carry in life that influence you. Because in life, there are a lot of mindsets we carry. We don't recognize that we carry them, and we're not aware of how much they influence our life and how we relate and how we see things. Now, psychology is not the study of the spirit. It's not the study of the human spirit. From a biblical standpoint, God, the Bible speaks to you as a triune being. You are a spirit, you have a soul, you live in a body. And I actually, in my life, as a part of a very dramatic work of God that I would call, when I began this renovation that I speak to a lot of times in 2004, 5, and 6, I began to study in the Bible the terms spirit, soul, and body, and just from front to back, read all the scriptures through with that in mind, understanding how we're made and how we're wired. It was very, very helpful. And for years, I would teach on it. And it was in my pastoring years, when I pastored the small church, it was very helpful, very refreshing, very beneficial. But at the same time, when I would teach that on a regular basis inside the church family, and was helpful to establish understanding of how things affect us in those three areas, in those three levels. When I began to teach in other places, I noticed the church was like spaghetti with so many different mindsets of what those words meant. So I had to spend a lot of time over-explaining. So I actually said, okay, let's kind of keep these things simple because we get lost in the weeds in some of these subjects. Really, when we talk about the soul, we're talking about how we think, how we feel, what we believe, and how we relate. Can we just keep it that simple? How we think, how we feel, what we believe, how we relate. There's a storage place in the soul. We understand workings of the soul. So psychology is the attempt to study the inner workings of what happens in thoughts and patterns and behaviors and ways that people relate. Now, if we're going to get into psychology, we're going to have to do a little history. And I'm going to do a little brief history. And I thought about starting at a couple spots in history. And I said, you know what, maybe I'll start here, maybe I'll start there, but I'm actually going to go further back. I'm going to go right to the beginning. But there's a couple things I discovered in my research over the years. Mental health battlegrounds are not new. There's the battlegrounds that we have, especially as far as depression, anxiety, mood disorders, narcissism, those kind of things, they're not new. Now, we may have updated terminology as man develops his understanding, as we try to articulate battlegrounds. But depression isn't new, OCD is not new, anxiety is not new, schizophrenia is not new. And for centuries, people have been debating if mental health issues are spiritual, if they're psychological, or if they're physical. And I'll touch a little bit in that as well, too. But I found it very interesting that, wow, these things that we're talking about struggling, even the issues of exhaustion, even the issues of stress, even the issues of busyness. I do a lot of reading. I find it a very rich personal experience, reading on the subject of busyness, chronic busyness. And you can trace that back further back to times you wouldn't even think were quote unquote busy. So I think that's important to realize that mankind has been dealing with these battlegrounds. There's been a lot of different perspectives, some of them very goofy, some of them very unhelpful, some of them downright abusive and destructive to people's lives that were not helpful. But when I look at mental health, I like to go back to even biblical times. And in future broadcasts, I'm going to do some psychological profiles of people in the Bible and mental health battles that you can see in the Bible. Some of them you'll hear me mention here. When you read the Old Testament is so rich because so much of the teaching is done in story. It's not so much, here's the instruction, it's here's instruction, and then there's a lot of story. There's a lot of journey. And you see a lot of failings, a lot of bad decisions. You see a lot of stuff happening, and you see the faithfulness of God working through it. Now, if you have black and white thinking, if you have all or nothing, very obsessive, perfectionistic kind of thinking, the Old Testament gets very difficult to read through because you get stuck in spots because it hinders you from seeing the big picture. There's many areas of the Old Testament I could bring and learn so much, starting with Adam and Eve. With Adam and Eve sinning in the garden, we can see immediately the workings of shame taking place. And shame is a common thing that is taught on. In my book, God Loves Me and I Love Myself, I teach on the subject of shame, bring it out in a chapter to help bring understanding because it started right there. And shame is a very big part of overcoming mental health. But in the story of Adam and Eve, there's something not a lot of people pause and think about. You can't tell me that Adam and Eve, when sin happened and they were removed from the garden, that they didn't have, at least for quite a bit of time, very debilitating depression. I've seen some writings that point to that and allude to that in some older research texts and things like that, but you can't tell me that they weren't hit with a bout of massive depression, of having not having that connection they had with God to walk in the cool of the day, to now be under labor, to now have to work. Childbearing was changing. Everything was changing. And then you see the strife that brought about in family with Cain and Abel. Right there, you see sibling rivalries. You see envy, jealousy, the movement of bitterness there, and the impact that unforgiveness has. And God even speaks and says, hey, sin's knocking at your door. And the reason sin was knocking at his door is because these unresolved areas of pain and brokenness and these thoughts that were hitting him that brought about murder. I could talk about someone like Moses, who was a child given away. And we look at that and go, oh, it was such a nice thing, but still he was given away, raised in Egypt. Moses doesn't know who he is. He develops an identity based on another land that he's not from. And there's a whole identity narrative in him then becoming the tool of deliverance that God uses to set Israel free. But we see Moses with an anxiety issue. Why do I say that? Because he's got a stuttering issue. He's got this anxiousness that he has around his speech. And it happens when he begins to talk, and you see God working with him on that. He also had deep-seated anger issues. I think murdering somebody and burying them in the sand. He got some issues. We see his anger where he slams the tablets of commandments, and many of the things that God had to deal with him on that. He spoke to the rock, then he hit the rock, and all that went on there. You can see throughout his journey many avenues, even Moses being overwhelmed with leadership, the frustration that he had. You see a lot of emotions working. And I think it's helpful to read it from the narrative of how God works with people. Speaking of Moses, we could look at Egypt. We could see in the earliest records, there's some interesting records way back in those days. We even see the word that is used, hysteria. And hysteria was a word that was often used like hysterical. And this person's going hysterical. Today, we often use it as a funny thing. I was laughing hysterically. But hysteria is usually used as a term of exaggerated, uncontrollable, or inappropriate emotions. And there are records in Egypt of what was described as hysterical disorders. And it was often attributed to females, and they would attribute it to spontaneous uterus movements within the female body. So anyways, ladies getting a rough rap on this one here. So we could look at Moses and we look at Egypt, even the early records of how people dealt with their thoughts and how they dealt with high levels of emotional struggles. We could look at somebody like Saul. Saul is a very good case to study as far as mental health, because we see his unresolved insecurity and fear that made him very compulsive, and then further on down the road made him paranoid. And he was so incredibly paranoid to create a delusion about him to the point he became paranoid of every movement David made in his journey. And he got to the point where the Bible says a spirit of insanity came upon him. And when you search back, you see where the undealt with insecurity, the constant fear and paranoia, that wasn't checked, it wasn't dealt with. Even though he had people giving him feedback, trying to ground him in healthy perspectives, these areas got carried away and took control at times. We could look at Nebuchadnezzar and his struggle where he started to lose his compass because he refused to take in the ways of God and the mindsets of God. One of my favorite people to look at in all of Scripture is King David. He's one of the greatest communicators of all time of the life of the heart. His Psalms have helped rescue many people from seasons of depression. It's brought a sense of connectivity to feeling heard and understood. He has talked about everything from fear to depression to up and down moods. In fact, many of his Psalms seems like he is on a up and down roller coaster as he's writing these things. We see through David someone who responds to suffering, deep pain and heartache and battles being lost, and making a lot of mistakes, big ones that affected his family for generations, but God still worked in his life, and he's still honored for the things that he brought about through his journey. One of the biggest ones that brings confusion to people is the study of Job and Job's life. It's an example of extreme, absolute hardship, epic suffering. A man who said that my deepest fear is coming upon me. We see him fall into a deep depression. We see him fall into deep sorrow where it was difficult for him to even just find a place of comfort. And we watch, what is it like when someone's every area of their life, every single area of their life has been hit. Even to the point where Job had to confront his self-righteousness because he'd rely on, well, I've done everything right, and why is this happening to me? I've done everything right. And there's so many mental health aspects we could look at of what we do in situations like that. I could certainly profile the story and the picture of Jezebel. Jezebel brings out an understanding of relationship manipulation. And this could tie into subjects of narcissism. It could tie into gaslighting. It could tie into all kinds of ways in which we control and manipulate circumstances. And Jezebel gives us a picture of that we see how it operates in relationship, both in a one-on-one level, at a group level. It can affect organizations, churches. You can even see Jezebel in operation in politics all the time. If you understand the pattern and see it both when it's mentioned in Old and New Testament. We could do a fantastic mental health breakdown of Elijah. When he's in great victory, he leaves, and under the influence of intimidation, he gets hit with the arrows of Jezebel's words, which cause him to spiral into depression. He goes so deep into a depressive self-pity, he can't see straight. He can't even think straight. He's lost perspective. And so we see the spiritual battle hovering over him. But we also see the very basic physical needs that we all have in life, which are, he needed sleep. Even angels brought supply, and there was a message of he needed to rest and needed to eat, and he's provided for food. So we see here in the battle, in the drop, there's not just Elijah, you need to get this spiritual whirlwind off of you, so to speak. It wasn't just that. It was, hey, you need some sleep. Hey, you need some food. And sometimes the best thing that we need when going through depression is a good night's or a decent night's sleep and some better nutrition. Because what we often do with mental health battlegrounds is we want to find our silver bullet. We want to find that one thing that this is it. This is the thing. And then we go around telling everyone it's this. This is the thing, this thing. And we want to create this blanket statement that then we use across the board in every issue. In Elijah's journey, you can see there's multifaceted things going on. He was also relationally isolated too, where in isolation, we tend to get hit harder because of the loneliness that's there. We don't have the compass of outside people speaking to us. Okay, I just got started and I'm already waist deep, if not chest deep, in the waters of mental health subjects. We see all throughout the Old Testament writings, the ache of the people, the heaviness that people carried, whether they're going through suffering, they're in bondage, the crying out for God to bring redemption, to bring salvation. We see the promise in Isaiah 61 of the garment of praise being given for the spirit of heaviness, that we would see people broken free from imprisonment to those who are bound, speaking of the gospel's work. Which is why when I teach the gospel, many pastors say, we got to get back to the gospel. We got to get back to the gospel. And we always need to be in the gospel, but I don't see healing of the heart being taught when it comes to the gospel. It's a side subject. It's given to side things for counselors. I am here to bring that into center stage. No, it is part of the good news of Jesus Christ. It is not just you just get saved, say a prayer, now you're going to heaven. There is redemption. There is a work God is doing in the here and now. But we have to get taught and equipped in that. And when we look at the New Testament, this is what Jesus launched the gospel on, was healing with the Father's heart of understanding the good news from a good God and getting to the heart of the matter. In every situation, when Jesus was brought a question that may have taken, hours and hours and hours of dissecting, he would bring back one statement or a question that would always get to the heart of the matter. And it showed tremendous wisdom. And the people that are the most helpful, they often know when not to speak. They often know when to speak. And when they speak, there's a concise message in the wisdom that's there. And Jesus carried that. And I want to learn from that more and more and more. But in every situation, he showed relationship care, where he had the value of slow. He had time away from the crowds. He lived simply. Jesus had a spectrum of emotions. Some of them modern churches would have a very hard time with. But they're there. They're in the scriptures. He got angry. There's record of getting really angry. He got sad. Even expressed deep sorrow. At one point, saying sorrow unto death. You see a man with a spectrum of emotions, but knowing how to process through a variety of emotions. Now, when you look at the New Testament and you look at the New Testament church, let me ask you a question. If you're battling anxiousness all the time, who would you go to for help? In the early church, when we see the church launching, you see their activities. First and foremost, you'd have brothers and sisters that you were always connecting with on a regular basis. House to house, breaking bread. Yes, you have your regular meetings, but you'd have your individual meetings. This wasn't, hey, you better get to your meetings. This was, I can't wait to go to this gathering, because it was gatherings of joy and celebration. Two, you'd have somebody who was discipling you, because the command Jesus gave was not go to all the world and evangelize, even though evangelism is important. He said, go and make disciples. That's a lot of work. That's relationship work. So you'd have the tribe you're connected to. You'd have someone who's involved in discipling, maybe more than one, and then you'd have overseers. This is true shepherds. These are people that would watch over your life, not in the sense of like Santa Claus. He's making a list. He's checking it twice. He's going to find out if you're naughty or nice. That's not what it is. It's being aware of you and being mindful of you, praying for you, being aware of what's happening in your life, standing with you in the things that ache your heart, standing with you in the things that you rejoice, but being aware of how your life is going. Today, we are in need of shepherds. We are in desperate need of true shepherds. Today, the modern pastor has changed a lot. It's become more of an organizational leader, more of a CEO kind of person. That's what our modern culture has formed, that person needs to be. If you want to apply to especially if it's a large influential church, you're going to have CEO skills to be able to work in there. You can have great knowledge in how to really shepherd people and how to have great one-on-one time, but that's not valued as much as valuing the big crowds and how to be able to grow things and how to organizationally run things smooth. So I'm already getting into where now there's been a drift in some areas of what we value as a church, what we put our time and attention to. Because when we look at the New Testament, you can see somebody like Timothy. I'll do a mental health profile on Timothy at some point, and his anxiousness that he struggled with. And you see Paul being a spiritual father to him and helping him out both in practical and in spiritual and in relational. He helps him in spirit, soul, and body. It's all happening there in the writings. Timothy had anxiety. He was very young. He was over his head, but God used him greatly. God used somebody like Peter who had massive anger issues, very deep impulsive behavior, very, very impulsive, flying off the handle. And yet God was patient with his process and with his journey and was used mightily. And his writings, inspired by the Holy Spirit, are what you and I read of when we think of being empowered to work through suffering and to walk in grace. And we appreciate Peter and his work. I could go into Paul too, and as well as his own journey. But in the church in the New Testament, there would be an atmosphere of tribe that I can't emphasize this enough. Relationship is what helps mental health more than anything else. Learning to be connected in relationship. That way, the way that we think, the way that we feel gets enhanced by the people that we're around. And of course, today you see a lot of that being shaken, whether it's family, society, culture, isolation, and you see a correlation to many of our mental health battlegrounds that we have, where we're needing restoration in the healing of our hearts and love, and restoration in truth that sets us free, and healthy relationships that help us to take steps of walking into freedom and overcoming. Okay, now that's just a biblical context. Now, if I went further now, we'd take a little bit of a trip till today, and I'll keep this brief. But when you look back at Greece and Rome in those days, and you look at what we call mental health, most all of research and understanding about mental health goes back to one word. And that one word is right here on the screen: melancholia. Melancholy. Melancholia. Melancholia was a term used for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And pretty much every mental health battleground went back to melancholia. Now it speaks of intense sadness and hopelessness, what we would call depression, but it was seen as branching into many areas of struggle, even anxiety or other things that we would talk about, dissociation, or a lot of terms that would be brought out hundreds, if not thousands of years later. But melancholia was the word that was brought out and used. When you read the ancient writings and research it, you'll see some people like Hippocrates, who was an ancient Greek physician, and he believed depression, he went physical. He said, this is a physical issue. And he said it's an imbalance of body humors or fluids. There was a philosophy back then that there were 4 key fluids that you need to understand: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Okay. And he believed in order to help melancholia, you need to reduce black bile in your body. Now, he also concluded that severe, what we would call mental health issues, even though they attribute it around, there's a melancholia issue here, that these issues were about the brain. And I think this is where we talk about chemical imbalance or chemicals being off, or this is a physical issue within the body. This was being looked at from the very early stages, even though they went into the 4 humors or 4 fluids and got on some tracks that we would go, okay, that's not accurate. There was this mindset of something physiological is going on here. So I say this to say the theory of there being a chemical imbalance kind of thing is not new, although it is highly pushed today, and there's some very, very significant problems with it, especially as pharmaceutical companies have captured that concept and utilized it. So back then it was balancing humors or fluids. Today it's balancing neurotransmitters. And so you see some of the early discussions and theories around this. Aristotle, he poised the thought that what manifested as melancholy, there was a level of creativity and genius to these people. So it brings this mindset of, don't just write this person off as they just have a problem. They also have a lot of creativity. There's a lot of sensitivity and even genius that could be there as well too. The Renaissance many years later would really embrace this and bring it about in a lot of writings and in a lot of philosophy. I've also read, and I couldn't find an answer to this, that Aristotle was tracing a lot of mental health battlegrounds to the heart. What I couldn't figure out, was he talking about the physical beating heart, or was he talking about emotional heart, as Jesus would talk about when he talked about the heart and what's going on in the life of the heart? Because if it's that, we're on to something. Because when I emphasize mental health, we want to go to the brain, we want to go to the body, and then with Christians, we want to go to the spiritual, and we get confused and lost in a bunch of details, right? And what I like to do is get people to the heart, because the heart has to do with relationship. And when you understand relationship, you understand the pathway of what influences how you think, how you feel, how you believe, and how you relate. There's another guy named Galen who, interesting because he studied a lot on the content of exhaustion. If you think we're an exhausted culture, it's been around pretty much forever. because there's lots of ancient writings complaining of exhaustion. It's been around for a very long time. And so Galen, who was believed to be the physician to Marcus Aurelius, that he did a lot of work on this humoral medicine, the four fluids and all that. So this kind of set foundation, and then history went into what's called medieval days, or some people call it the Dark Ages. And this is from the fall of Rome all the way up into the Renaissance. So there's quite a bit of years here. During this time, the church as it was known back then, which a lot of it traces back to the Catholic Church, Orthodox Church, you could even go back in history of the Church of England and so forth. This is really bringing about the church's influence because they had a lot of power, a lot of influence, a lot of control, and influence over people's lives and how they lived in areas, especially when it came to this now. Because when you think about living in those times, when you had a mental health problem, historically, if you had problems with your thoughts, emotions, or relationships, it's very common, where are you going to go? You're going to go to your church. Usually a priest, a pastor, some kind of high-level ministry leader, some kind of shepherd that you're connected to. There'd even be people who weren't necessarily devoted to the faith, but they would still utilize a priest or pastor in the community with their emotional, with their mind struggles, which is interesting because it brought about that faith is a very, very important part of how you work through pain, how you work through suffering, how you work through battles that you're dealing with in your life. So you bring your questions to them, and depending on who you're meeting with, you'd get their kind of feedback. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road, and this influences many of you today, especially anyone who battles religious OCD or scrupulosity. Your history of your battle is found even way back then, because most problems regarding mental health is documented over and over again, would be attributed to three main areas. The first is disfavor with God, punishment, a sense of salvation is not in reach for you. God is far, he is distant, he's upset with you, he's mad at you, he's punishing you, he's afflicting you, he's putting these things on you. So you better do something quick to fix this. So for a lot of people, it created a problem on top of a problem. I mean, you're already struggling with depression, and which they would call melancholia at the time. You maybe say, I'm having some sadness, and they would attribute that sadness not as just something that you're going through and God is with you and showing grace and compassion. It was disfavor with God and punishment. Now you tell me, would that make you more OCD if you were living under that? I think you'd have a lot of obsessive compulsive people. I'm wondering if there was a high percentage of very guilt-ridden, obsessive compulsive people under that kind of teaching, under that kind of mindset. The second answer you'd get is this is a sin issue. It's something that you need to repent of. So what would happen is you see a lot of life through a sin, not sin viewpoint. Is this sin? Is this not sin? And I mean, every day my email box has questions and interactions with people who carry that kind of mindset, which is a sin obsession. It's not being aware of sin or a grace awareness, which helps us to see sin in the light of God's covenant with us and seeing it in context. It's a sin obsession. So when it comes to our emotions, you'll see it as, is this emotion a sin emotion or not sin emotion? And so we would try to tag and label and put a pin like that on things, which is going to create a lot of problems because you're going to have sad days, you're going to have sad seasons. It didn't give much room for grieving, does it? And people who lived in these time periods, my goodness, the calamity, the death, the disease, the problems, the pain. And if you're looking at everything through a sin or not sin, it doesn't let you see the spectrum of just emotional living of life. Yeah, I get that you're anxious. Understand, because when you understand someone's story, you can understand what they've been through and put it into context. There's also this aspect too of demons, of attributing it to demons. Now, can demons have influence in mental health? Certainly, they sure can. But I am concerned about those who jump to this so much, they obsess to it so much, and this was often emphasized in a very obsessive kind of way. That if you're helping someone and you're finding that you're struggling to get them free, it's up. You got a demon, so we got to do a bunch of deliverance. in certain circles, especially Catholic influenced circles, they'd call it exorcisms. And so then it was connected to witches. You've been under the influence of a witch. There was a lot of, if I could use the word, hysteria over witches. You see that a lot in history. And so this was the association. This was, if you have anxiety, you got to fit it in with one of these three. Now, those of you in the comment or watching this, you're probably watching this because you have some sort of struggle that you have. These are your three options. That's going to lead to more condemnation. It's going to lead to unproductive struggles. Now, are there aspects where we could understand this in perspective? Yes, but these are three bullets that are just going to steal, kill, and destroy and condemn you. It leaves people oppressed, and it can manipulate people into unproductive rituals. Oh, you need deliverance. Oh, it didn't happen. Okay, you got to do it again. Okay, well, you need to put more money in the offering. Okay, you need to read your Bible more. You need to and put on people, which is what the Pharisees, what they did to the people in their time period that Jesus railed against, was they put this burden constantly back on people that they weren't following the rules. They weren't doing this and they weren't doing that. Were we giving people room to grieve? We're talking about time periods where there's extreme famine, constant wars. There's not even plumbing and toilets and a lot of people's lives. If you look back in history and see tombstones, you're going to see a lot of tombstones of children, of babies. There's a lot of young infant death, children's death. Lifespans were often very, very short. There was a lot of pain to process. To run everything through this grid is going to leave people further oppressed. So this is depressing. But I bring this out because when it comes to psychology, you have to understand what history we're dealing with. Because a lot of these factors are still in play today. They become these cards that we throw out at people, and it doesn't give for the bigger picture of what's happening in people's lives for a variety of reasons. Then we go into stages, and I'll move through these briefly because I just want to bring out observations I found. The Renaissance, which it's a large time period there from the 14th to 17th century, they saw the mindset of melancholia as a struggle, but they started to see many of these people are deep thinkers. They're creative. And they can even have like levels of what we would term genius. So it caused humans to look at the broader scope and complexity of people's wirings instead of like something wrong with you, something good, that there was a whole range of your life that yes, you were depressed, but you felt a lot of things. And maybe you could work on that. And maybe you could develop that a bit. It was maybe just the start of it. Not in the way I'm saying it, but maybe just the start of it. But there was also a viewpoint too during this time that was popular. That was, this is because you have a weak temperament and you were born with this and there's nothing you can do about it, for it to ever be changed. Now, and we would see this in a period called Enlightenment, where you'd see that mindset happen. But let me just go back to the Renaissance. This is very, very interesting. In the Renaissance, we'd see this mindset of what you could call fashionable melancholy. And I know you could picture, if you could see this, where it was displayed maybe in theater or popular culture or writing or plays, where someone would depict and just kind of wear this very, I'm in deep thought. I'm just so sad. And in this deep sadness, it was seen as like, I'm super deep. I'm super deep. We see that a lot today. Sometimes we say, that person's being over dramatic, or that person needs a lot of attention. And we could say, but there was a expression of that in culture where you'd see melancholia portrayed in those kind of ways. Now, moving up closer, we're getting closer and we're getting closer. I'm going to go to the 19th century. We had this term called neurasthenia, which is a word that psychology was using because psychology was starting to grow now. As we move into the 1800s, is becoming a thing. And so as they were looking at melancholia, they're like, there's some other things here too. And this neurasthenia, it was labeled on people who felt chronically restless, lethargic, fatigued, irritated, and depressed. Most likely today, we would call this chronic fatigue syndrome. But an American named George Miller Beard, he's a neurologist. He pointed out that the increasing pace of life, industrialism, the rise of new technology as main causes. Now, this was back then. What does that sound like? It sounds like today, right? Increasing pace of life, industrial, technological advance. And so he was bringing this out way back then with even just, steam engines and things like that coming out. And there's a rise of what was often called nervous excitement that's coming about. And this kind of busy state that people are getting into. Meanwhile, in the 1800s, there was a lot more study and research given to human thought, behaviors, and struggles. Psychology was become their many, many names that were coming to the surface. And so in the 1900s, we see an escalation of this. We see the rise of the psychotherapists, of the psychologists. And there's two names many of you be very, very familiar with because these were popular names. Because during this time, we're seeing many battlegrounds taking place. They're trying to put names and words to what is this? Because up until this time, melancholia was really the word that was given for most mental health battlegrounds. And yes, there was hysteria. Yes, there was this word I have a struggle saying, neurasthenia. They're trying to understand. And so Sigmund Freud comes on the scene. Now, these guys aren't Christians. Him and Carl Jung were not Christians. Carl Jung, I believe his father was a pastor. I think he had some rebelliousness involved in that too. That's a whole story within itself. But Freud recognized something that, to be honest, in my work, I take for granted. I operate in this mindset all the time. And it's amazing it took a guy like this to bring it out, is that he brought the importance that childhood experiences and how they affected us impacted emotional development and the thought patterns and how they related to emotions. And so it does seem like in some ways this is a novel concept that your upbringing influenced. Now, I could look at the Bible and look at people's upbringings and how it affected them. I could look in scripture and find these things, but somehow through the process, we maybe just weren't aware as we needed to be of how childhood impacted us. So this observation made by a guy who's not a Christian, not supportive of Christianity, what do we do with this? He's not a Christian, not a believer, but he's observing something that's a pattern over and over and over and over again. And then you have someone like Carl Jung, he's now brought out his contributions are incredibly influential to a lot of things you see today. Good, bad, and ugly. So for example, we use the term introvert, extrovert, stems back to his research and his understanding. The Myers-Briggs has a lot of the things that based off of Carl Jung's research and his work. And you could look at that in a way of being anti, you could look at it in a way of being helpful, you could look at it in a way of somewhere in between. He brought up a lot of the terms that modern psychologists can often embrace. Not all, but many, many embrace, like the term the collective unconscious, the collective unconscious. And which I actually believe when you're speaking to that, you're really talking about the human spirit. But you don't want to understand the human spirit apart from God. You want to understand the human spirit through God and how he created us, if you really want to understand it. He also brought the term shadows, archetypes and dark shadows. We as believers can know we're talking about the place of sin here. He brought out the term persona and how we all carry a persona. We could say the false self, the fake you that we present to the world. I think certainly the scriptures talks about the flesh being the old you because God redeems and renews us and gives us a brand new identity. So in a way, I see him labeling things. He's dodging around the ways of God because I see in Carl Jung's story a rebellion in the ways of God, bucking back. He's giving labels to things that we already see in scripture that are there. For example, the term ego. It's really speaking the pride that man carries to preserve himself in his own ways. You've got a lot of ego, you're defensive, right? You got a lot of ego, you're very self-preserving. You're trying to lift yourself up. We could call that the pride of life. The Bible talked about that, many, many years ago. But again, they're resisting the Bible. They're pushing it aside to create other terms. Now, could you say that's demonic? Sure. Could you say that's deceptive? Sure. But I also am interested in the observations of people in these patterns because that's helpful for me to understand and how people live because psychology is studying people's patterns. And what we're going to see in the church's focus is and these are some of the conclusions I've come to in my research. But anyways, let me go back to Jung for a second. So an example like the ego, we would talk about the pride of life or the pride or the old you, where Jesus said, if you want to save your life, lose it. Lose your life for my sake. It's just like learning to let go of the old you and stepping into being surrendered to the work of Christ in your life and letting him rebuild you up. So in some ways, psychological research can point out things and observe things, but they're doing it apart from God. It's a secular humanistic mindset, right? So some will say, well, I cannot embrace anything they're saying at all. I want to step in and say, can we though see the observations? Because Sigmund Freud called out childhood problems and the need for us to work on childhood problems. And every day of my life, every person I interact with has stuff in their history that's influencing their present. Now, Christianity has notoriously been shame-minded when it comes to their history. So we don't want to go there. We don't want to talk about it. And it's under the blood. And we avoid a lot of things in darkness, and we push it into darkness without bringing it into the light. Now, during this time, there's a major shift that's taking place. Major shift. And that is people, remember what I said, in the old ages, you'd go to your priest, you'd go to your pastor. There's a shift taking place. People in droves now are starting to go to a therapist, a counselor, a psychologist to get help for their problem. They're going in droves. So there's a shift that's taking place here. And I think there's some things that we need to ask in understanding history of why this came about. Because we're seeing people struggling with anxiety, struggling with depression, struggling with schizophrenia, struggling with a lot of battlegrounds, right? What's the church doing at this time? We can obsess with, Freud, Carl Jung, but what's the church doing at this time to help people? And why are people in droves going to see a therapist? I think there's some reasons to consider. I think one is life was becoming more and more industrialized, fast-paced, and you kind of start the mindset of you develop a person for each, area of your life. You got a plumber, you got an plumber and electrician. If you had plumbing, electricity, depending on where you were in time frame, right? Fast pace is happening. But what I see historically during this time, the church is starting to become at times obsessed and consumed with church growth. So now the goal was bigger, the big mindset, which is an American-infused mindset. Bigger is better. That's what America does, right? We're just going to be bigger and bigger. We're going to do new. We're going to do better. We're going to, big money. And we attribute this success, and this seeped into the church mindset, which was, man, we could reach more people. We got to do more. Did that search for more and bigger cause us to lose the quality of the small? It's a question I bring to the table because in this time period, we could go 1860s, go back a little bit, and we see one of the first big mega churches by Charles Spurgeon, the Metropolitan Tabernacle, which had a 6,000 seat auditorium. Now, do you know when that was built? You'd think, maybe 1900 or something like that. No, 1861. So the United States was just about to enter into civil war. While a 6,000 seat auditorium. Now, here in the States, I remember back in the 20s, Amy Semple McPherson, she built the Angelus Temple in the 20s. I think it was just before the Depression or right in the midst of it. That was a 5,000 plus seat auditorium. So these things began to become goals for pastors. And now pastors to this day, if their church isn't growing and growing and growing, they are struggling with an internal depression or internal insecurity or something's wrong with me because of this new metric that meant being big was successful, being small meant you're unsuccessful. The problem is when you sit down with a therapist isn't sitting down with 1,000 people, 100 people, 10 people. The therapist is sitting down with you, one. And so when you look at this, I do see a period where the church got obsessed with big. Go big. Everything's got to be big. Think big. God is big. But did we lose sight of the small and we made a trade-off here? It's just a question I'm asking. Was the church no longer? Because if the church addresses depression and anxiety in meaningful ways, We're going to have to slow down. We're going to have to process life together. We're going to have to do life together. We're going to have to have different values, because in the big and the fast, we're now making everything efficient, everything quick and efficient, and keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it moving. So was the church operating from a shame-based approach where people go, I feel safe to sit down with my psychologist or therapist to talk through whatever I'm battling through. And I feel like I can't get that anywhere else. So this is where I'm going to give it. Did the church hit people with such judgmental solutions? It didn't provide long-term change in people's lives. Are we seeing the breakdown in the family too, as everyone's chasing the big and chasing all, and we're not dealing with our brokenness. We're not dealing with the day-to-day struggles that people are having. We're becoming more isolated from community in some ways, which therefore disconnects us from the help that we need. Now, during that time period, Alcoholics Anonymous stumbled onto something. They said, we got to get back to a couple very important things. Get to the small, get to everybody's on the same page. We're all equal in this. Nobody's better than anybody else. We're all broken. We all need help, and we all have deep issues that we need to work through. I believe Alcoholics Anonymous, whether you think that was great or founded by great people, or whether you did deep dives on people that founded it, and Bill W., whoever, and you saw the goofy things that maybe they were messing with in their spirituality or whatever. We can't negate something being brought out that we needed to see and we needed to address, because they saw, when you come here, first of all, we're all broken and we all need help. And there were many alcoholics that go, man, when I messed up Saturday night, I can't go to church. I've got to get it together to go to church. I go to AA, I can come stumbling in there with the hint of it still on my breath. And I'll know that I can be received, and we're going to work at it. Now, I'm going to be held to working through my life, working through stuff. It brings me back to some old stories my parents used to tell me. Both my parents worked in a program called Teen Challenge Program. And it's founded by David Wilkerson. Originally in New York, it's spread out all around the world to this day. And they mainly worked with drug addicts, and they were working in the early stages with alcoholics, drug addicts, and they were in some ways having some good success, to the point that even social programs were paying attention to what they were doing. And I remember my parents just telling me stories about what they would do. And I remember my dad telling me, yeah, there'd be people coming in and they're detoxing. And we didn't have, a special facility or anything like that. He goes, we would just sit there and we just pray with them all night. We just pray with them all night. And I'm not telling you that's what you got to do. You got to pray with people all night long. It just showed the relational connection. And he said, we didn't know what else to do. So we would just pray in tongues all night while they're in withdrawal symptoms, especially, whether it's cocaine or heroin, which is just the massive withdrawal symptoms they were going through. They would just pray in tongues with them all night. Now, many people would go, ooh, pray in tongues, pray in tongues. Should we do that? We should pray in tongues over anyone who struggles. And we look to formulas. We don't see the heart of somebody staying up all night being with somebody. Because I think what's happening is we're losing authentic relationship connection, and people will find it wherever they can. So the church gets upset, or people are going to psychology. And it's instead of looking within and going, we need to be what Jesus founded us to be, a place of a solid family that we all, in our goofiness, in our struggles, we all learn and grow together. And we're going to work at that, and we're going to value that. Okay? So there's a lot of factors like this I bring to the table. But in further looking at history, a big thing that influences how many of you see mental health today came out of World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and the subject of post-traumatic stress disorder. Because in World War I, this term came out called shell shock. And it was used because it created a link between the impact of constant explosions and the artillery shells constantly going off, and the after effects that they saw certain soldiers experiencing. And they go, I think there's something here called shell shock. And in 1915, the first article was published about this issue. Many criticized this diagnostic, believing that shell shock was simply cowardice. Now, all throughout history, you have to understand, what we would consider trauma, if you went from 1915 and went back in history, it was mostly considered just pure cowardice. You're just a coward. You can't handle this. Get out of here, right? Now, is it understandable if you're weak in a certain area, you're not used to battle, you got to get trained in battle. That's why people need training and so forth in order to get into it. But it was seen just from that standpoint, and they thought it would be only addressed by military discipline. And in some cases, it could help. But they saw over and over again, guys are coming home and things ain't right. And it show up in their marriage. Now the rise of alcoholism and abuse, violence going on, nightmares and all these things happening. And imagine not even having a thing to go, what is this? What am I dealing with? So after Vietnam in the 80s, it became so much of a problem that the Vietnam vets, they lobbied the American Psychiatric Association intensely to say, you've got to acknowledge this. This is an issue. And it established an actual diagnosis that began to be developed, put in the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, and became something known. So now to this day, if somebody says PTSD, most people know what that is. And it brought about a realization of trauma. Trauma is a whole subject of itself, but trauma brought about mental health awareness. Because over time, people started to realize, I may not have been involved in a war, but there was some unhealthy stuff. There was some downright terrifying stuff that happened when I was a kid. And that stuff, I think it might be having an influence on me today. And realizing it's conditioning our nervous system. It's impacting how we relate and how we think. Now, if we're going to talk about psychology, you have to talk about the rise of psychiatry, because now we're talking about medication. And this really stems back to post-World War II, 1950s, where the rise of the mindset of, there's some chemicals that when they're ingested, they create certain kind of reactions that maybe could help people in this way. And in the beginning, psychology and psychiatry were at odds with each other. They did not get along. Psychologists said, no. We're not just going to use a pill. We're going to work with people. We're doing the week out work. And so then you have the odds that were taking place there. Over time, there began to be an acceptance of each other. Within this framework, now, I'm not making this stuff up, just so you know, what I'm sharing with you. I'm not making this stuff up. Within this is where the term chemical imbalance started to have its rise. And treatment centers, let me back up for a second there. This is where companies looked in and realized, wow, there could be profits made here. And we saw this a lot after World War II. There was even companies that used chemicals that were used in war, and afterwards they pivoted and said, we could utilize this. Maybe there's a way we can utilize this as a form of medication, right? So a lot of times people, if they had problems historically, a lot of people would use alcohol as a way to comfort themselves. And of course, you see a lot of drunkenness. People would say alcohol's bad. But many people would say alcohol's a chemical that's bad. This is medicine. This chemical is medicine. So this is good. And within this kind of theory of looking into the chemical levels of people and what helps and what's happening, the chemical balance thing rose to the surface, and pharmaceutical companies began to grab this. So you would see a change in treatment centers. And you can read this in Basil van der Kolk's book, which is an amazing journey through understanding the history of trauma. And he talks about when he was in treatment centers, there would be large recreational rooms, and he would play basketball and volleyball with his clients. Now, it would be unheard of today for a clinician to go, yeah, I was playing basketball with my client. That's like every ethical boundary. No kidding. I was asking a counselor I went to years ago what church he went to, and he got uncomfortable. And I was like, okay, I get it. You think I'm going to go and like chase you down in church and something like that, right? Anyways, going back to van der Kolk, he said in his writing, he said, we had the recreational places where we would, even in the swimming pool, we'd swim, we would have basketball. You would bond with them. He said, over time, the recreational areas were shut down and laboratories were brought in. And now the laboratories were put in. And now the priority is we got to find chemicals that are going to help deal with whatever battles and problems people are having in mental health. And so it was in this that the chemical companies, and now we have profit coming in. And now we have the United States government, the FDA, we have all these things coming in together. And one of the focuses that began to develop was first you pathologize something. Meaning this is an issue, this is what's going on, this is what's happening. Diagnosis leads to diagnosis. Pathologize plus diagnosis equals medication. So this became something that became a mindset that was given to people over and over again. And pharmaceutical companies definitely profited off of this. So they would try to find a target of saying, this is the thing that is the issue. It's serotonin. You have a serotonin chemical imbalance, and we have this that's going to then target that, that's going to help that. Now it's coming out more and more, very, very problematic that that's not exactly the case. And there's downright lies founded in the fundamental perceptions of that. But if you go online and read old pharmaceutical manuals or advertisements, you'd see some of the craziest stuff said, but it was pointed to, here, use this, and it will make this problem better. Who doesn't want to feel better? Who doesn't want something that's going to make them feel better? Now, there's no condemnation for anyone who's on medication. You have to understand that. I work in a no condemnation zone, but I like to help you understand what's going on. I'll do a whole broadcast in itself on the Christian and medication. But we cannot deny the rise of pharmaceutical companies. They are so powerful. It's why they're often called big pharma. So powerful and so large, they can become more powerful than any news station and even more powerful than government. If you think government has a lot of control and power, it can be even more powerful and influential. Then from there, what we see now in movement is we see an opening now, and this is going to progress a lot, is we're seeing the rise. We've already seen the rise of pharmaceutical companies in the past 60 to 70 years in dramatic fashion, in multiple billions of dollars in influence. But now we also see the movement towards psychedelics. And you'll see things like substances like ketamine for depression, or psilocybin, or even magic mushrooms. And you'll see people talking about taking psychedelic trips as a way to help their mental health. I talked about that in a Q&A. I don't want to get into that right now. But today, when it comes into psychology, I believe there's a lot less shame around mental health. Some people say there's a lot of shame. And I want to say, be around when I was full-blown OCD anxiety, 20, I didn't know one person. Everybody in this broadcast, you could list 15 people that have a mental health struggle if you thought about it. I couldn't name one. I didn't know one person that was on medication. Now, people were struggling. They were just all hiding. People were on medication. They were just hiding it. Because when I shared my story in church, I noticed people popping out of the woodwork. Yeah, me too. So I don't see there being as much shame. That factor is definitely being worked. There's so much more room, so much more resources. But we're seeing now more than ever, it does seem like there's an inflamed amount of fear, anxiety, obsession, and deep battle of the mind. But at the same time, we're in a very high-speed culture. So it's get quick fix. And when you go to a doctor and say, hey, I feel like I'm having some depression, they're going to go to their script quick. They have a time limit to meet with you. They've got to keep you moving on. And so that's going to create limitations, because how you think is very, very powerful. So if you think, let's take a thought. Nothing in my life matters. And if I take that thought and just cycle it a few times, what's it going to start doing? It's going to take my state, my emotions, it's going to drop it. If I keep doing that over and over again, wake up every morning, all throughout the day, just have that echoing, nothing in my life matters, nothing in my life matters, nothing in my life matters. It shows what focusing on and ruminating over a certain thought, what it does to wear us out. So you have all kinds of those, right, in your life that you're working through and navigating. So sit down with somebody who's got 10 minutes, they got to keep you moving. Of course, they're going to go to something, well, this is the only way I can help you right now. You use this medication. I don't know if it'll help. I don't know if it'll not. I won't get into medication right now because that's a whole subject of its own. But what I believe is our psychological problems are revealing is a deep need for relationship healing in our lives. What it means to be loved, what it means to live in peace, and how to navigate thoughts in a healthy way. Were you taught that? Was I taught that? I wasn't. I've had to learn it. And many of you are having to learn it the hard way. Many of you feel like you're on your own learning it. But I want you to be encouraged that you're not alone in that, because many of us are all on this journey of walking through what does it mean to gain help in how we think and how it's impacting our life. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about my story. I share it in many different ways. To start it off, if you were to talk to me at 20 years old, you were to tell me I had a broken heart, I would just brush it off. If you told me I had some issues I need to work through, I'd brush it off. So if you're 20 and you're working on yourself, good for you. If you're 25 working on yourself, good for you. Because I wasn't quite there yet. I saw counseling as you go to a counselor to get advice. That's kind of how it's, and get some counsel, right? Or I saw counseling when you're having really bad problems. A lot of people do that, right? So if somebody says, hey, my wife and I were going to see, we're getting some marital help. We're going to a marital counselor. Ooh, what's wrong? It's got to be bad. It's got to be a crisis. And that's when you do it. And then when the crisis is over, you go back to life as it is. You don't really focus on it much more. Many people in the church prided themselves in never getting counselor therapy. I heard a couple say, we've been married such and such years. We never went to counseling, as though it was like a badge of honor. And sometimes I would look at these people and go, I think you could use some, because they could have benefited from it. But there was a lot of pride over our brokenness, a lot of shame that we had. So my first interaction with a counselor was the church staff pastoral care person. And that didn't help a lot. So then I went to my boss, the senior pastor, and he struggled in knowing. And how was he going to know relationship OCD? No one really knew. You couldn't Google it at the time. But he had a card for a psychologist and said, hey, he works out of the local hospital. Why don't you see him? So I saw him for a season, saw this counselor. And I was so obsessive and so intense. He gave me a bunch of books, references on material by a guy named John A. Sanford. And there was some Carl Jung stuff and things. And I ate it all up. I ate it all up, devoured it. Why? Because I was hungry and I wanted answers. I went to psychological training, counselor training, and went deep into it. I can't say it helped me a whole lot, but it did help that he told me you need to move out of your parents' house. That was important. That was a mental health step. A lot of people don't see that as a mental health step. It is. And so over time, there were some good things, good experiences I could get into. Now down the road, when I got into more deliverance emphasis, I went black and white, and I took all the psychology books and all the counseling. I had a whole load of it, and I threw it all in the dumpster. It was kind of this that's it, all this garbage. After many years of that, God would, I believe, balance me out a bit. And I can appreciate perspectives, appreciate insights without leaving the power of the pure gospel of Jesus Christ and its power to bring transformation into our lives. But anyways, I eventually went on medication and went on an SSRI, Lexapro, and then I had Zoloft. Xanax for the tough days. I had Lexapro for the week, and I had Xanax for the weekend when I was at church. Ladies and gentlemen, how about that? Because church for me was stressful, high anxiety time periods. I saw very quickly that Lexapro, it numbed the symptoms. And that's a lot of what SSRIs do. They numb the symptoms. So you're like, okay, I don't feel as anxious. I don't feel as this, but I also don't feel great. Just feel kind of numbed out. And there's side effects I experience in that too. Xanax, it being my mind is going blank for a second. What's Xanax? What's the class of medication it is? Forgive me. I have a mind blank right now. I have a lot of things that I'm thinking of. It's very, very addictive. Benzo. Thank you. Benzodiazepines. And so I didn't utilize that much. And that one is a very, very difficult one to come off of for many people. So I'm a hot mess. I have nowhere to go. You think you don't have anywhere to go? I didn't have YouTube didn't even exist. There was no one to email. There was no one to talk to. There wasn't even a place to go. Is this a thing? No one, even in my counseling, picked up OCD. Never once was it even said. So you have to understand, I've had to plow through a lot of territory, just blood, sweat, and tears. During that time, I got exposed to deliverance ministry and inner healing, kind of get to the root issue deliverance ministry. Devoured the teachings, had a lot of good input from that. There's also a lot of goofy things. There was a lot of problems too. I witnessed a lot of cult-like activity. I witnessed a lot of very extreme practices. And it's one of the issues I have with modern deliverance ministry. It becomes consuming. It becomes just all consuming. We are in a battle. We are in a war. But deliverance people, it's everything. Go to their channels. It's everything. It's a demon. Everything. Everything's a demon. And deliverance ministry doesn't make room for just emotion. It's like, oh, I'm just really sad today. Get that spirit of heaviness off of you instead of just working through it. And I learned through decades of seeing emphasis in certain areas. My conclusion has been we are not emotionally equipped on how to navigate. Now, we have a battle. We have an enemy. It's certainly there. I talk about those things. I have it in some of my material. But during this season, what was very powerful for my life and for the lives of many I help is a revelation of how much God loved me as a father. And that dive in my life changed a lot of things. It's just knowing that he loved me. So I could chase the fears down, chase the thoughts down, let me repent for this, and it becomes a lot of just cycles that we just keep repeating for the sake of doing it. But learning how to be loved is a whole different frequency. It's a whole different framework. And while I'm grateful for some of those things, I saw a lot of goofy, dysfunctional nonsense. And I've learned over the decades, helping people is not a quick fix. And we have to stop throwing at people quick fix solutions. And there are insights and things that psychologists say that can be helpful. And you're dealing with wiring in people's lives that goes back and how they relate and that takes time. It takes patience. And so, to be honest, it took some humbling experiences for me to realize there are many different avenues and many different areas where people are being helped. And while I may not agree with every avenue, just like if I walked into every church, I could tell you 10 things I disagree with, but I can appreciate the emphasis the church is bringing. Now, many pastors and preachers, they would have a list of objections to psychology. And here's some of them. We don't need to talk about the past. The past is the past. And a lot of that is fueled by shame. And a lot of it is fueled that we don't understand grace, because grace frees us to be able to talk about past, present, and future in a way that doesn't condemn us to hell and push us away. There's the perspective of psychology is a religion. And I can understand that. But you have to realize any program you become a part of can almost become religious, so to speak, in the sense that you become consumed by it, become obsessed by it. I've met people go to AA and it's like AA is their religion, they're like living, breathing AA. Okay, that's gotten a little too far. You become obsessed. We all have obsessive tendencies, but even in the obsession, I had obsessions in my life where it was all deliverance, all repentance, was all psychology. And I learned God is faithful in the ditches. He'll work with you and bring you back in as long as you just are teachable. He balances things out. Many could say, psychology is demonic. Now, I would say that, there is a lot of deception in pathways of psychology, and I'll get to that in just a moment. I have some things I want to say, but let me just hold off on that. Some would say you end up talking endlessly about your problems. That's not a good counselor if the person's just endlessly talking about their problems. Psychology brings up your problems and leaves you stuck in them. Again, that's not helpful therapy or helpful counseling. I've heard a pastor say, psychology causes you to focus on the flesh or the old you. When I already told you, psychology talks about the persona, the fake you. Not that we need to rely on them for the biblical standpoint of the old you. The Bible speaks about the flesh and the works of the flesh and the old you. You are a new person, right? I could get into the flesh in another broadcast, and I will, right? And some pastors, psychology wasn't founded in the church. And so they they get upset over that. So I have some question for these people. Instead of just trying to create statements that you then regurgitate to other people, I have questions that I would like to bring back. If you're a church leader who you are one of those, like, I'm just against counseling, I'm against psychology, I'm against any of that, I want to first ask you a question. You as a pastor, you as a church leader, you as a Christian, what kind of help do you get for your life when it comes to the struggles that you have? Because you have struggles, whether you admit them or not. There's a high percentage of pastors who have anxiety disorder issues, depression, super high percentage of pornography addiction, other kinds of addictions. So while you're yelling at everyone at the pulpit, when you leave the pulpit, you've got these issues. Where do you go for help in these areas? I'm not here to condemn you. I'm here to sober you. Because you need to align what you're doing that's got you help. So have you had anxiety issues? How'd you get help? Have you had depression issues? Because our churches, I would say the overwhelming majority of churches have massive anxiety and depression going on right now. It's not really who has anxiety, depression, it's who doesn't. And those who aren't, it's just you're not right now, but you have at some point in your journey. Now, many pastors don't feel they can go anywhere for help, so that makes it even harder. I know pastors who shared their struggle with depression and anxiety lost their job, right? So it shows our distortion in perspective of this. So I want to first ask you, how are you getting help? Because you're going to bless others by what you've received. What about your family members? Because you might rail against, but then you got a kid who's got obsessiveness or got depression. What are you going to do? Hide it? You know, they're going to counseling. Now we're going to hide that because you've preached against it. Now what are we going to do here? And what I want to ask you, those who oppose, what are you doing? Months ago, you know, I replied to a video with Todd White, who is against a lot of inner healing stuff. And so what are you doing to actually help people who are dealing with anxiety they've struggled for a long time, depression, or even the branches I get into where people are spinning in obsessive guilt and spinning in scrupulosity and spinning in compulsive living? And many times pastors haven't observed the practices that they criticize. Have you actually sat down with somebody and hear their approach, hear what they utilize? What influences them? Have you met anyone in the work and been able to maybe have them sit down with you and say, here's some things? Now, I've done that in my life. Now, there's some practices I've seen, like in church ministry. I'm not a huge fan of theophostics, for example. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I get it. And some people get a lot out of it. But I sat down with people that do it. I asked them their methodology. I asked them what they do. I got curious. I'm not like, oh, their deception's going to jump on me and I'm going to get a demon of deception on me. I'm going to hear your approach. Okay, let's sit down. Can I process something with you? Let's see where it goes and see where it helps. And now I'm getting to know, and it changes a lot when you get to know someone who's actually in the trenches. So if you're critical therapy work, then show me in your church where you are actively encouraging healthy mindsets in the people of God. Because there's a lot of mental illness unaddressed in the church. It's just true. It's a lot of it going on there. And we spiritualize over it. Oh, I just hear from God. I have a prophetic gifting. I've seen a lot of it clouded over and super spiritualized. And meanwhile, the church is like on this train of growth. We're going to get people more saved. They're going to fill out a card, and then we go, when people are struggling, like, well, they need to be discipled. And in a lot of ways, culturally, we've left them hanging because we built something that could not shepherd people. The current church structure does not shepherd people. And so then church people are going, I'm not being fed. And there's some things in that. And then pastors goes, well, that's because you need to be serving. Meanwhile, people are like, my marriage is struggling, and you're just throwing serving at me, and I'm struggling with constant anxiety and panic attacks, and I'm having crazy thoughts at night. You're just telling me go serve. It's not healthy. So let me try to land this a little bit to help us gain. And remember, this is more long form. I'm not going to, on Sunday Night Live, I'm not going to typically go as long as this, but I want to take a bit of a journey. I want to appreciate a couple contributions that I appreciate when it comes to psychology. The first thing is the research and documentation of how people think, relate, patterns of thinking and behaving to help identify and understand. Now, psychology isn't the study of the human spirit. It's not the study of God theology. So I'm not looking to them for that, but it's helpful to look at their research and the findings that they come to. Now, I have an issue with that I'm going to get to in just a second. But just like if somebody did a study on things regarding the human body, and we look at the research and go, okay, this is helpful. In that way, it would be helpful in the same way I can appreciate a psychological finding of research that's been done. Just like an archaeologist can dig up something and I can appreciate what they discovered, but I may not embrace their theory or evolution and those kind of things that they hold to. But I could still appreciate that research and the scientific evidence that's brought to the table. So I can appreciate that. Over my shoulder, you see a purple book there. Actually, you can't see it. But this is a diagnostic and statistical manual, DSM-5. And in fact, the 7 distortions I teach on, you can find in there in the OCD section. Whenever I tell psychologists I've read a lot of places in this, they go, how'd you not fall asleep? I don't know. There's just certain nerdy things I have. Well, these things are published to help identify. Here's some of the things here's some of the labels, that's diagnosis, and this is what it often looks like. I'll do an episode on should I be diagnosed? Okay. Lord willing, the creek don't rise. It's going to happen. Now, I will tell you, I may not get the newer editions. That's going to get into what my problems with modern psychology are. I may not get the new editions because the pattern of morality is shifting like sand. And anyway, I'll hold that thought for just a second. So first is the research, the documentation helps to see patterns and things, and even background to people who struggle with things, with mental health battles. And 2 is the terminology. It's very helpful to go narcissism rather than listing out all kinds of traits, right? I shorten it even more. I call them narcs, right? It's nice to go, okay, depression or anxiety or the term bipolar. Okay, it gives a terminology to a battle. Personality disorder. It gives context, and then there's lots of details, and I'm using one word. So I'm thankful for that. In the book, When Narcissism Comes to Church, written by Chuck DeGroat, just great writing on that he put together. He says this. He says, the heart is prone to deceit, as said in Jeremiah 17:9. And contemporary psychology has done us the service of naming our heart's deceits as pathological patterns of relating, often born out of life's brokenness and shame. And now, I want you to understand too, I don't separate brokenness and sin, because sometimes people can kind of separate that. Sin over here, broken. No, all brokenness comes as a result of sin, because what does sin do? Sin erodes relationship. And the things you battled in your life have come from the erosion of relational wholeness. So as God is sanctifying us, he is also bringing wholeness to us. Okay? And I could even show you that scripturally. We could do all kinds of deep dives in that. Okay, so that's where I appreciate. But here are my concerns. And they're significant. I run into this mindset of therapists and stuff. Pastors, stay in your lane and preach the Bible. Let us do the mental health work. Now that's challenging for a pastor guy like me. I dove in all the way. Here I am. Where's your degree? I don't have it. I help people. Here I am. What are we going to do about that? But that division between psychology and pastors, there's been that tension, right? Now I know there's been many pastors have given terrible advice, but there's also been a lot of therapists have given really bad advice and not good help for people. Okay. But I understand they want people to be safe. They want people to be trained. So I understand that, please. I understand that. But that kind of mindset of like, you teach about Adam and Eve. Well, we'll talk about anxiety here because we have training in that. Okay. And what I think it does is it compartmentalizes things. So if you struggle with anxiousness on a regular basis, you're like, my only 2 options are therapy and medication, and not seeing the bigger picture of how you relate what your day is like, how you relate to yourself, what your circle of relationships are. You see, what psychology is studying is your life, not just this one little area called anxiety or one little area called OCD. My biggest problem with modern psychology, though, has got to be the values drift. And this is where that ship is sailing. I grieve because counseling and therapy and psychology, they may not acknowledge God, but they would honor your faith and they would honor what is healthy. And we're in this big drift now culturally when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to sexual identity and the subjects of gender and all that. We have pushed away from God's design in it and psychology instead of going, hey, we've got research and studies that show the problematic patterns here. Instead of holding what they've known to be true, they've drifted with a lie. And you would not sit down with a schizophrenic and say, yeah, you know, those things that you're hearing, man, that's true. You should go ahead. Now, I'm not trying to compare a schizophrenic with gender confusion, but this is a very deceptive slide that has taken place. Where now, if you're questioning your gender, you should go explore it. We're going to support that, and we're going to encourage that. So now I have to go back. What do I have to do? Undo all the research I've done on findings that you have found, psychology, that you found that helped me. For example, I remember reading, it was an older study. I remember in the 90s, they did a study on boys who struggled with gender identity disorder, is what it was called. Gender identity disorder. And they found that a large percentage of the mothers in the study of boys who struggle with gender identity disorder, their mothers, high percentage, had borderline personality disorder, significant depressive kind of issues. That's interesting because then that tells me something about the upbringing. But guess what? Can't even talk about that now. In fact, what I'm saying right now is affecting the algorithm. As we speak, wherever my algorithm was, it now just went, and then I'm going to have to email you guys and go, hey, can you share this? And that's why some of my future broadcasts, when I go deeper, it's going to be Rumble only because I need to be able to just talk about these things. Psychology is embracing things once established as illness patterns. And we're giving into exchanging the truth for a lie. And so there's some of you that are going, okay, I want to help people. What do I do? What do I do? Because I'm going to be indoctrinated under this now. And I think that I don't have a black and white answer for those of you that are going into psychology, those of you going into counseling. I mean, if you could go a biblical Christian route, I mean, that's the best way and best route. If you're not in that and you need to get your credentials, you need to get your thing, do your thing. If you feel called and want to do it, get your diploma, get your degree, and know where to pick your battles. You're going to have a kind of a mindset of Daniel. You know, Daniel worked under King Nebuchadnezzar, one of the wickedest kings in all of history. Babylon is the epitome of evil, right? So I was going to say something sarcastic about our government, but anyways, you kind of had a little bit of a Daniel mindset. It was like, okay, I'm working and operating, but here's where I'll draw the line. Nah, not going to necessarily do that. And you find your way through it because I don't have perfect answers for what lies ahead because I know that ministries like what I do, there is a mindset of don't you dare teach things that don't go the route of where the ideology is going as far as same-sex attraction, gender identity, and those things. If you don't embrace that and promote it, that you're going to have problems. So at some point, I may have to deal with that. But it doesn't mean I don't love people. It doesn't mean I don't every week seek to fill this broadcast with compassion and grace. But I do recognize that this may be problematic. Now, I can read the Bible and look at it, and I see a lot of things that psychology would bring about, whether it's, slow stillness or mindfulness. I could show some of those precepts in scriptures. It may not be the exact wordings, You could see exposure therapy of how God teaches us to face our fears and deal with our fears. There's many other aspects that I get into that you see, that you hear. I don't see the concepts as being exclusive to each other. Now, there's another area I want to address before I land this plane, and maybe take some questions if you have them. My goal was to land this within a 2-hour time frame. So I'm doing well here. But one of the things that comes up, and I want to address this right now, because many of you send questions to me on a weekly basis with this area. Is this spiritual? Is this psychological? Or is this physical? This is probably at the top of the list, a question Christians and people in general get hung up on, and it leaves them spinning. It leaves them spinning. Now, when we talk about spiritual, we're talking about your relationship with God, spiritual warfare, the battles that we're in. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, right? There's a battle that's taking place. We're talking about your understanding of grace, the finished work of Jesus Christ, the redemption he brought for you. Because there is truth where psychology may bring some perspectives, but there's no redemption. Because there's only one who can redeem you and give you a whole new start. And it's even better than what any man could offer. So how you process reading the Bible, how your biblical viewpoint impacts your world and how you relate, what it's like to connect to God, your spirituality, there's so much to it. We kind of just leave that to just mystery, and we don't understand. The Bible says a lot about our spirit. Okay, so there's that aspect. Then there's the psychological, which is the realm of the soul. It can be areas of how you think, emotions, how you relate, your behavior, how you believe. The soul becomes a bridge to your physiology and your spirituality, is what it's really what it is. It becomes like when God created Adam, he created him out of the dust of the ground. There's the physical, right? And God breathed him, their spirit, breathed the breath of life, and Adam became a living soul. Right? Because we're linked to our bodies. We will have a new body one day, but our spirit is eternal, right? The soul brings a linking where that's the storage place now. So if I'm talking to you and you're talking to me, I'm hearing what's like stored in your soul, what's been stored there. So when it comes to mental health, is it spiritual? Is it psychological? Or is it physical? It's all three all the time. You're not like, oh, this is just my body, and spirituality just kind of took a break, doesn't have anything to do with it. Or is spirituality, and it's all three in operation. Now that's overwhelming for a lot of people, right? Because we get lost in the science of how your body's made, and then we're trying to learn neural pathways, and we're trying to learn, synaptic linkings and this and that, and we're trying to, study this and that. Which that's where a lot of modern movement's moving into. Highly scientific, highly heady. And we're getting it. I can appreciate it for what it's worth, but we're getting very heady, because when we're talking about anxiety, depression, we're talking about relational things too. Okay. You can get lost in the subjects. That's why we call our ministry Turning Hearts Ministries International, because the heart is where you say, where do I focus, Mark? Do I focus on the body? No, focus on the heart. Out of the heart flows everything. When we say the heart, we get to the heart, we're getting to now what you value. We're getting to what you're afraid of. We're getting to your pains, your joys, your dreams. What relationship has meant to you, right? For example, I could be talking to a dad. Hey, how are the Yankees doing? How are you kids doing? Go right here. Might be, oh, they're doing great, man. I'm just so proud of it. Or it might be like, I'm having a hard time. Heart. We have to do heart work. So in all three areas, spirit, soul, and body, we can get very sterile in our approaches. This is spiritual, so we need to pray more. Okay, God, I pray, and I'm making sure I pray. Okay, I got to do my prayers, my 5-minute devotionals, right? We got to do I got to work on my thinking, my soul. I got to go to a therapist, somebody sit down. And sometimes it can get too clinical and so sterile. We don't realize It's a person, it's a human being. This is emotions, right? Or we get so in the body, oh, it's a body thing. And be wary about just falling into the chemical imbalance hypnosis, by the way, because it's a very, very faulty theory in what is being proposed out there and what's being used in advertising, because it's conditioned us to go, oh, they just have a thing that's off. It's off. Now, I do give room for toxic influences, give room for the effects of modern medicine, toxicity. There's a lot of problems there. I could get into that. I give room for that. Give room for that and how it's affected. We've seen in our own lives, in our own kids, of how even the VAX of early childhood vaccinations affected our kids. There's another one. The algorithm just went. Here we go. I'm on a boat ride here. Okay, so I'm not negating those areas, but what we need, the journey is here. I have anxiety. Okay, tell me about what love is like for you. Yeah, but I need to know how to fix this. I had the unpardonable sin. Tell me what love is like. When was the last time you felt loved? That's different. Now I'm getting you out of here and getting you here. So while all these things are fascinating, and I taught them for years and years and years, but I saw the one thing that made the difference was this: getting to the heart of the matter. And so my encouragement to you is take in information that's helpful. I have a lot of people that write and they're hyperventilating that, oh my goodness, what if I read this thing and what if it was a false doctor? I'm going to be deceived. There's a lot of fear of deception. That's a hypervigilant paranoia of deception. So what it does is it keeps us from discovering. Now, when I read psychology, it's not going to be my religion. It's not going to be what saves me. My journey is not because psychology helped me, but I appreciate the insights that then became tools and references for me walking in freedom in my life. So I'm grateful of the people who spoke into my life. I'm grateful for the God moments where I had interactions of love or interactions of nurture, because I just keep learning. Mental health is not just for somebody who has a diagnosable issue. This is an everybody issue. This is a life issue. And I want to call the Church of Jesus Christ, instead of whether you support psychology or not, let's make a value decision that we want to value being healthy, because our marriages, our families, our brothers and sisters are crumbling underneath battlegrounds that we need to love on them, support them, help them. And there's a lot in that. But I think the goal of the New Testament writings was that the church know how to relate to each other. Those epistles were teaching them how to love one another, how to get the bitterness out of their life, how to deal with conflict, how to understand what Jesus did for them so they could be the powerhouse that God's called us to be as a church. And so I pray this is a blessing to your journey. I'm going to take a joy break because I talked for just about 2 hours straight without stopping, but I'll come back for some of your questions in just a moment. All right, I want to take a moment, see if there's any questions. I checked my email and stuff like that, but my love, it's great to be able to share this today. It looked like there was some good conversations going on and things like that. Hold on one second. Go ahead.
Am I back? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, everybody. We had to go into the second song, which I actually love the best because the mic literally fell off.
Yeah, her microphone fell off.
That was a lot. Anyway, John Pinchinati did a super chat, and he said, "Thank you for walking out your journey and helping us in ours. This content is so neglected and so needed."
It's great, John. Love you, buddy.
I know. Also, somebody else just made a comment, which I thought if you just wanted to quickly say yes or no to, you need to talk more about Catholic guilt.
Yeah. Well, my whole series I did on toxic guilt. It's in there. There's a whole long series I did on that.
Did I say Catholic or toxic?
Toxic. It's not called Catholic guilt.
No, but I know. Wait, and then you said toxic, and I'm like, wait, did I say it properly?
You said Catholic guilt.
I did say okay.
But
okay,
I have a teaching on toxic guilt.
Yes.
Right. But I'm not just going to throw Catholic guilt in there because there's all kinds of church guilt.
Right.
In there that I could find in the Catholic Church. I could find in a church down the street.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, I'm going to read you a question, but I just want to say first that everybody was just so awesome in the chat, and thank you for not. Everyone was just great. They adhered to what you had asked, and
it's great.
Not have to ban anybody. No, it was great. Everyone was awesome, and loved everything that you were bringing tonight, and appreciative of you putting together this teaching. So someone did ask, though, about Myers-Briggs personality stuff and said that they were fascinated with the Myers-Briggs. There are some things that can have some downsides. So using your cognitive functions as an excuse for sin. For example, high TI or TE users' preference over logic than feelings are far more prone to not care about others' feelings. Okay. For my cognitive functions, I've noticed myself doing this as an excuse at times and wanting to be my Myers-Briggs type to fit in my box and get my identity from it, which isn't good in that extreme. How do I balance MBT and not let it cross out things of God? Also, I've heard that the Enneagram has pagan roots. Is that true? If so, can you still use good things from it, spit out the bones, other thoughts on Myers-Briggs and Enneagram, which you kind of touched on it for a skinny minute, but go ahead.
I think everything has pagan roots, by the way. Just
right.
There's rarely anything I find that doesn't have something squirrely in its history. That's
we just actually brought out the Myers-Briggs stuff in the community. And there are some things in there that help you understand yourself too.
Yeah. I remember that coming in as a question, and when you started reading, I go, wait, I have that here.
Oh, okay, you did get it. Okay.
And I think that she answered the question herself in the sense of, I notice that the logic over feeling. Basically, you can lean to what your test says. You lean to that, and you don't allow flexibility and movement. Like.
Right. I've seen people do that a lot with the Enneagram. They're like, well, I forget the numbers. I'm a 3 set, whatever.
Yeah.
That confuses me. And they know what they are. And they're like, no, that's what I am. And they just hold to it. Right.
From my perspective, I think let's start with the Myers-Briggs, is that it's like the introvert saying, well, I don't do that because I'm introverted. And you don't allow yourself to stretch.
Right.
And so don't let any test limit you, label you, pigeonhole you. But if it helps understand some strengths, if it understands some patterns. So the Myers-Briggs helped me tremendously, realizing some of the ways that I'm strong in thinking and feeling and so forth. It was very, very helpful. I got the big book of my specific profile. It was awesome.
It's kind of fun.
I'm aware of the Enneagram. I'm aware of some of the historical things with it. I haven't really personally found a lot of use in the Enneagram. Now, what I'm going to share is anecdotal. It's just me talking, but I do find a lot of obsession with Enneagrammers where they're like, because I'm a 2/4, and so because of that,
right.
And this is like early meeting them.
Right.
They're throwing numbers out and they have number parties where they're just throwing them around. Listen, I'm laughing about it. I'm not saying that's of the devil. Everybody has to do their sense when they're understanding history, what's their level of how much history they can handle knowing, and B, what do we do as a result of that? You know, I can, when I look back at church history, most of what churches do today has deceptive roots to how our church services function. You know,
our holidays, right? We could
Yes.
go real deep, y'all.
Yes.
It's like, yeah.
But I'll still go, okay, happy Easter.
I still love my Christmas tree, and right.
Yeah, you kind of have to pick your battles, and Christians can be very superstitious and also
A little stitious.
and they can also be very black and white, and everything has to be all evil and all good. But look at yourself. There's a lot of good that's going on, but there's also a lot of stuff that ain't so good.
Yeah.
So that's my feedback from that. So she wrote, can you use good things and spit out the bones? Yes.
Absolutely.
I think you can use the Enneagram, Myers-Briggs. In my opinion, you could use it. But if that thing is like revolving around you all the time,
Right.
that's where it, that would be my concern.
True statement.
Any others?
Not really. Let me see here. Well, someone wrote, people forget that the Enneagram actually describes the patterns of how people tend to sin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Correct. True. Which a lot of psychology, like I said in the quote with Chuck DeGroat, a lot of psychology is actually pointing out what sin does. You know?
Someone said, at what point does feelings become a problem, looking at how God is in your life, and also how do you practice being dependent on feeling?
It's a very
that's a bit,
very broad question.
That's a big question.
You know, I have a lot of stuff on emotions. You can look that stuff up, and teachings on that. Feelings, nothing more than feelings.
I mean, there's the only other the super chat was from John Pinchinati. Let me go. Hold on. I cannot forget about Rumble. Let me go over to Rumble. No questions in Rumble. We're good.
There wasn't there something in the beginning of the broadcast? I said, don't let me forget about that because I want to mention it. Oh, it was somebody. I think it was somebody talking about going to school.
You answered it.
Yeah. Okay.
About and I actually was trying to tag the person, and so they may have left the chat.
I think
someone wanted to become a counselor, should they go get an actual degree in psychology?
Oh,
that was what it was.
Gotcha. I tend to go with, if you have a heart to help people, just start helping people and see where it goes. You know,
right?
Because we need the premise of my heart today is we need people who know how to be compassionate, non-condemning, that are able to listen, able to, in love, support the truth that sets us free in people's lives.
We need people being relational.
Yeah.
Stop with all the super spiritual hibbity-dibbity. I'm a seer, I evil, I this, I that. You need to get rid of this. Stop.
Hibbity-dibbity, a rat-a-tat-tat.
Stop. Okay. No, we need more relational people discipling out of relationship. Earn your way into people's lives. Love on them, get to know them, see if you're a fit. If you're not, keep it moving.
Yeah.
We try to, like these people, well, I'm called to this church. How do you know? I'm called here to help this pastor. No, you're not. Stop that too. Okay. Yeah. I just took a real big
Yeah, you did. You did.
I just went around and shotgun fired.
You did.
Stuff.
You did.
Oh gosh.
What? Yeah. Okay. I thought I saw a comment that I wanted to reply to, but I can't remember.
I don't know.
It's saying, but this is great, guys.
I'm just getting tired.
Wonderful.
I'm getting tired and hungry.
I'm getting hungry too. Listen, hope you enjoyed this. I put a lot of work into trying to make this concise and get to the point. I pray it was helpful for you. Share it with those you love. And even if you two don't like me today, it's all good in the hood. And Lord willing, and the creek don't rise.
Yes,
this is
sir.
your brother from another mother.
And your sister from another mister.
Saying we'll be back with more insights for your healing and freedom journey. But in the meantime,
we out.